I'm Carmine Gallo with Guy Raz. He's the creator and host of popular podcasts like How I Built This, Wisdom from the Top, and The Rewind on Spotify. These are podcasts that are listened to by millions of people every month. But today, we're talking about his new book, How I Built This, and I am excited. This is going to have a permanent place on my bookshelf, Guy. Good work.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's so great to see you holding that book because it's one of the first times I've actually seen it in hardcover. I do not yet have my own copy, so thank you for showing it to me.
Guy, it's very metallic-y. But I love
that
it.
Alone is a reason enough to pick it up, right?
It'll stand out. I like the design. I don't know if you had anything to do with it, but it's simple and it has this line, but it's not a straight line. It's kind of a crooked line, goes in different directions. I take it this is a metaphor for the entrepreneurial journey.
It really is. I mean, that logo is based on the logo of our podcast, How I Built This. And it really is. I mean, it's a crooked path, right? And that's the idea behind the show. A lot of people, I think, assume that, they see these very successful entrepreneurs and they just assume that, one day they woke up and bam, they were successful. But the reality is that for the most part, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Mark Cuban or Howard Schultz or Sarah Blakely of Spanx or Tony Hsieh of Zappos, any of these incredibly successful entrepreneurs went through really difficult, challenging moments, times where they were full of doubts and wondered whether they would actually make it and whether their business would succeed. And so the path to success is really full of failure and, moments of doubt and even suffering and even potential collapse. And that's really the story of success. It's the story of a twisted journey, this kind of twisted path to eventual success.
Guy, maybe that is the reason why we crave these entrepreneurial stories. They never seem to get old. And perhaps it's because we see those crooked paths in our own lives.
I agree. I mean, think about like a romantic comedy, right? Basically, it's the same story over and again. It's two people meet somehow, they fall in love, and then they fall out of love, and then by the end of the story, they fall in love again. You know the basic contours, but we keep watching them because every story has its different sort of twists and moments. It's very similar when it comes to entrepreneurial journeys. I talk about this concept of a hero's journey in the book, which was codified by Joseph Campbell, this philosopher in the 70s, who basically argued every story has, a series of archetypal events. The hero has to leave the village to realize her dream. She meets a mentor. The mentor dies. She slays a dragon, falls into an abyss, almost dies. These are elements that you find in the entrepreneurial journey. There's somebody with a crazy idea. A lot of people doubt this person's idea. This person persists and almost fails, almost, collapses, has to make a pivot and somehow manages to succeed. And so the contours are the same, but the experiences are different. And so I try to make the show and the book relatable for people because I want people to understand that the people you're reading about or hearing about or listening to on my show, they're just like you. The only difference is that they went into the phone booth and put on the cape. That's the only difference.
I'm glad you brought up The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. I don't think a lot of people realize that without his archetype that he outlined, we would not have Star Wars.
Nope.
Because George Lucas based it on.
But
you're one of only two people who actually brought up The Hero's Journey. You and Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio based his book on.
Yeah.
I love that. Let's focus on storytelling then. You had this wonderful quote by Ben Horowitz, the brilliant entrepreneur and co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz. And he says that the CEO's main job is to be the keeper of the vision and the story. Love that quote. I think that leaders and entrepreneurs underestimate the power of their story. What do you think?
I agree 100%, especially when you are offering a forward-facing product or service, and this applies to big companies, but also to small businesses, to small companies and services in communities, because The reality is every business is a story. Every single business, whether you're an HVAC business or Airbnb, right? The story of your company does three very crucial things. It connects your employees to the business, to the mission of the business, because when they know the story, they're more connected to what they are offering. It connects you with the investors, your shareholders who need to believe in your story and believe in your product. And ultimately, most importantly, it connects you with your customers. When customers understand the story behind a product or a service, they're much more likely to be invested in it as consumers. We've seen that with Ben and Jerry's, who've been on the show, or Bumble. I mean, Bumble is a great example. This is
Whitney Wolf, right? Whitney
Whitney
Wolf
Wolf,
of
right? I
Bumble.
mean, she was
Tell us.
she was a co-founder of Tinder. She had to leave unceremoniously after a very public and messy sexual harassment situation there. She went on to found a new dating service that was very specifically designed to give women power and not men in the equation, in the dating equation. It was designed to be a gentler and kinder dating site. And today it's a hugely successful space for women to meet people to date where they are, they are empowered. And the story of that business and that journey is really powerful and really connects people to Whitney and also to Bumble.
You bring up a good point. Now I recall the section, the chapter where you mentioned Bumble. That falls under storytelling to explain what you say is the why, right? Like, why should I buy your product? Why should I join this company? That's what you mean by connecting your idea to your stakeholders, to your audience, to your listeners. It's they always solve a problem. So they're telling stories. I think this is the common theme through great entrepreneur success stories is they're solving that problem. So Sarah Blakely had her own like a personal problem or a frustration, and she solves that with her idea. The Whitney Wolf solved a frustration that she had with online dating apps. I think this is a recurring theme, which is using story to reflect the why does this idea or this product even need to exist. So in one story, in one origin story, you could speak volumes.
Volumes. I mean, think about Impossible Foods and Pat Brown. Pat Brown is a lifelong vegan, okay, but he's also a biochemist, and was a professor at Stanford, and knew that he had the ability to solve problems. And he wanted to devote his life to solving a big problem. And he decided to take a big swing. And that big swing was climate change. He did research and he discovered that livestock production accounts for about 15% of global carbon emissions. Now, I say this as a meat eater myself. I wish I didn't eat it and maybe ate a lot less of it. But I have so much admiration for that idea. You know, we humans, because of our meat consumption, are really contributing to deforestation and to other emissions that are not sustainable. So he wanted to basically figure out a way to give people meat, to have them continue to be able to eat meat, but to make it from plants. Because the argument that he made as a biochemist, he knew that you could actually create meat from plants, from this hemoglobin protein that is found in soy, that you could actually recreate it. And that's what he's devoted his life to. If you've had an Impossible Burger at Burger King, they're pretty remarkable. They're pretty hard. It's pretty hard to tell the difference between an Impossible Burger and a beef burger. And he's he's trying to do that with steak and chops and other products. That's an amazing story, and a story that has connected Impossible Foods to millions of consumers and has turned it into one of the most, profitable food companies, food startups in recent memory.
That example of Impossible Burger does bring up another theme that I see recurring not only through your book, but something I've been thinking about lately. Now that people are growing more accepting of these terms like purpose driven companies, stakeholder capitalism, it seems to me that this puts leaders in a position where they need to be the chief storyteller of their product, their idea, or their brand. Would you agree?
100%. I mean, and by the way, I think that's a really great trend.
I do too.
Consumer-driven change, purpose-driven leadership,
Mhm.
businesses that are really focused on responsibility. I mean, you're starting to see this more and more in the apparel sector, even in the furniture sector, which are traditionally huge polluters. One great example is Allbirds. The guys who founded Allbirds. I mean, uh, Tim Brown is a Kiwi from New Zealand, and he really wanted to figure out a way to use wool, the merino wool, all this wool that's produced in New Zealand. There are like, for every New Zealander, there's like 10 sheep, right? And he wanted to figure out a way to use all this surplus wool in an environmentally sustainable way. Well, today they've created these shoes, these Allbirds shoes, these beautifully comfortable wool shoes made from wool and from trees. They're working towards a carbon neutral product that would include all the shipping, et cetera, et cetera. That's a really, really important, an important change, an important sort of signal. And both Joey Zwillinger and Tim Brown, the co-CEOs of the company, are really out there not only talking about their story and what they're trying to do, but they're trying to encourage other businesses to do the same thing. And I think that's a really important development in the business world and in the startup world. And I think that trend is only going to become more and more powerful, particularly as we see more and more political polarization in the United States, that businesses are going to step up, and especially startups, and say, look, we have a role, we have a responsibility, consumers are demanding it of us, and we demand it of ourselves. And that's a good thing.
That's why I love focusing on communication skills and storytelling, because I think those are not only practical skills, but more fundamental than people think.
No question about it. I mean, there's no question about it. You can go to a store and see 100 different energy bars, right? Or 1,000 different energy bars today. And you can make a choice based on what ingredients you want, or what flavors you want. But by and large, many of them are quite similar. But if you know the story of Peter Rahal and RX Bar, and how that story started, you are more likely to go and grab an RX Bar. He knew that he couldn't compete with all these big brands and go into Whole Foods and hope that people would pick his brand. So he created an energy bar designed specifically for the CrossFit community, because CrossFitters eat paleo. They don't consume dairy products. They don't want sugar. They can't have any refined oils. They can't even have beans or legumes. So it has to be a bar made with things like meat, which it's not, but meat and vegetables and eggs and nuts and maybe dates. So he basically created an energy bar that is a combination of nuts and dates and eggs. And it was a hit with CrossFitters. And that kind of that niche market going, and I talk about this in the book, going in through the side door, instead of going to Whole Foods or to Target, he went to CrossFit gyms and began as a direct-to-consumer business. But slowly, as the buzz kind of began to build, lo and behold, Whole Foods wanted them, and Trader Joe's wanted them, and Target wanted them. And it became a huge phenomenon. And it really began with the story of trying to serve this very niche community.
I love those stories. Like we talked about, you never get tired of hearing those
No.
great stories. I think this is an inspiring book too. I don't know if you've been thinking about this or if you've given it a lot of thought. I certainly have, and you bring it up in the book that many great companies, and let's end with this. Many great companies start in economic downturns and recessions.
Yep.
Slack, Airbnb, and many others.
Betterment.
I did a
Yeah.
That's right. I did a lot of work for Intel, communication training for some of their senior executives. So I learned a lot about Intel. Intel started in the late 60s when it was a terrible downturn.
Yeah.
But what I learned from Intel is that the people who pioneered Silicon Valley, and this is what I want to ask you, were optimists at heart. Their optimism is a recurring theme in great entrepreneurs. I don't know if you've ever, have you given that much thought? Are entrepreneurs just inherently more optimistic than average?
I don't think they're inherently more optimistic. I think they cultivate their optimism, right? It's sort of like, and you're right. I mean, Hewlett Packard is a great example. That's a business that started in 1936. who would have been optimistic about the future in 1936? We were in the midst of a Great Depression, on the verge of an international war. There was a lot of talk of isolationism in America. There was a lot of polarization in America. But here you go. These two guys started this business, and Silicon Valley really built Silicon Valley. I think that optimism is hard work. It's like being healthy. It's like being happy. It doesn't just come. I mean, to a very tiny number of people, it comes naturally, but that's very rare and unusual. Most of us have to work at it. If we want to be happy, we have to do a little exercise. We have to, you know, um, show gratitude or think about the things we're grateful for. For some people, it's prayer and meditation. We have to eat, relatively well. We have to kind of force ourselves to have a positive outlook. And I think it's the same thing with optimism. You have to cultivate that within you, and it's hard work. The reality is there are moments where any founder, any human is pessimistic, is feeling like the world is going to collapse. But I found that time and again, what really has helped successful entrepreneurs get through that moment, there are a couple of factors. The first is a co-founder. When there's a co-founder involved, invariably, when one person is down and feeling, low, the other person is saying, "Hey, we got this. Let's keep going. Let's keep moving forward." And the other side of it is having experienced failure in the past and knowing that building a business is a marathon. It is a long, long marathon. And even once you reach cruising altitude, there will be dips and there will be challenges and there will be, moments of crisis. But once you have experienced failure, it helps you gain perspective that you will ultimately be able to overcome those failures. And I think that's really the key. I don't think it's a preternatural gift that entrepreneurs have. I think they've really made a conscious decision to cultivate it. And I believe that anybody can make that decision.
Well, it's an inspiring book, Guy Raz, How I Built This. Thanks for writing it. I think it's going to be inspiring, not just for entrepreneurs, of course, but for business leaders in any category. Thank you so much. What a wonderful book.
Thank you, Carmine. Thank you so much for having me on.